Tonight we're going to talk about UX best practices. Let me get us started here. Okay, so as I mentioned, I'm Tim Franklin. I'm going to be presenting tonight. I'm the Director of Product Development at a company called Gravitate Solutions. We write software for associations, and we have, in particular, my team works on a data analytics platform called Nucleus. And so you can check that out on the web and learn more about it. There's my email address as well, and then you can follow me on Twitter. I do have a lot of UX stuff that I basically retweet. I don't do a whole lot of my own content. So, but there's a lot of great information out there, blog articles and other cool stuff that is out on the web. So I encourage you to look that stuff up. I used to be a user experience architect and then was promoted into director over the team, but previously to that, I also was the head of a UX committee for a large corporation, and then have always been doing a lot of different UI and UX type of design, as well as like full stack development. So I always had an emphasis in it, but never formal training. So that's a caveat to my expertise. So okay, so let's learn a little bit about UX best practices, and this is a pretty agnostic to devices and form factors and all sorts of other browsers or whatever else. It's just general guidelines that you can use when developing applications, whether it's a web application, a phone application, or just any other type of software. Feel free to ask questions as well. It's going to be a little slide heavy, so I apologize for that, but I'm going to hopefully get some interaction, and then we have a group activity later, so you're going to really enjoy that. Yeah. It's just to keep you awake, don't worry. So the butterfly effect. Small ripples can become big problems. So complication, when you're dealing with software, not just when you're writing it, but when you're actually using it, can cause stress, believe it or not. So you can, so discernment, and by that I mean when you're trying to figure out what is this and how does this work and all that type of stuff, all the details of it, can be taxing. It can be stressful, and it can make it difficult to understand, what you're trying to do, much less how you do it. So it can be, complicated and make it difficult to accomplish the goal because you've overly complicated the user interface. It also makes people increase their focus, and so they have to spend a lot more time figuring out, okay, what is this? Why are they asking about this? I don't understand this, etc. And so it can wear people out overall, especially if their job all day long is to use your software, which I've been in that situation a couple different times. So they use your software to accomplish their job, and so and more than one person too. It could be a whole team of a bunch of people. And so you want to make sure that what you're providing to them is helpful and is engaging for them and is easy to understand. So it can be subtle things, but if there's problems or if there's issues within the UI or things aren't very intuitive, that kind of builds up over and over when you have a whole lot of it. And so it can affect your reputation beyond the application too. So sometimes it's not a captive audience where it's an employee that's using the software. Sometimes it's someone who just wants to go and they've downloaded the app that you've built, or they are using your website for some reason. And so then they have trouble on using your website and they call up customer service. They're not going to be in a good mood when they're also having to call customer service because they've already had a bad experience on the website. Or they are going to mention something on social media about, oh, you know what? This company doesn't know what they're doing because they have a really poor experience on their website. And so it can transcend beyond just the website that you're building. It can affect the entire brand of the company that you're working for, whether it's your own or whether it's some other company. So, noise pollution. How many people remember MySpace? Show of hands. A few people out there, right? So it was cool because you could design anything. It was also not cool because you could design anything. And you could come up with designs like that. And so you have so much stuff going on the screen, it's difficult to find what you're actually looking for, and most of it's just a detraction or an advertisement. In this case, it's for Redline, which is a movie. And so even the entire background is distracting from everything else. There's no contrast, it's accessibility problems, and it's just honestly a little ugly. So, question whether or not everything should be there, and try and figure out how do you how you simplify the interface and give them what they're looking for, as opposed to say, okay, well, marketing wants to add this, and I think we need to have this, and oh, wouldn't it be cool if we had this feature too, and trying to put it all on there at once. It makes it difficult to actually use it. So along those lines, feature overload can be just as burdensome sometimes. So if everything is at your fingertips, you can't grasp anything. I don't know who originally said that, but it sounded cool, so I wrote it up there. But so if your application does everything and everything's immediately available, it's not just a noise issue, but it's also a feature issue, because the power users will help find the power features, but a normal user who's just coming in and doesn't use the software all the time, or they're brand new to the system, or they're just a casual user that doesn't want to use it all the time, they're going to be overwhelmed with all the different things you can do. So maybe it's really cool, but it's not actually useful in the way that it's presented. So you have to kind of balance that with your features. Trying to decide what is a nicety, as a nice to have versus a necessity, and you want to make sure the necessities are what are plain and easy to get to, whereas the nice things are just something that's ancillary that you can get to if you need it. Okay. So if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, you don't expect a platypus. Talk about expectations. So who knows what visual affordance means? Any guesses? It's a fancy term that just means that something you can look at something and understand what it will do or how you interact with it. So like a button on an elevator has a visual affordance of, oh, look, it's got, shape to it, it's possibly circular, it's got some sort of like a shadow around it, and it has some depth to it, and it looks like I could depress it and it would go in, and then it would make a selection and probably light up. And so same sort of thing with a door here. So you can kind of infer just by the shape of it or by the look of it that a door handle is for you to put your hand around and pull it, versus if you're going to push it, you press on a flat object that pushes away. And so how many times have you seen doors where you have to push but you have a handle at the same time? And how many people do you think every day are going to be confused about that? Pretty common, unfortunately. So a cognitive break is just another term that's telling you, it's basically saying, this is different from what I expect, and I have to stop what I'm doing and think about this. So when you go up to a door and you try to pull on the handle and it doesn't open and you have to push, you have then stopped whatever else you were doing and are now trying to figure out, okay, I've got to push, so I've got to, okay, now, and then your whole thought process is done and you're having to get back on track after that. So simple little things that shouldn't have any sort of problem with your day can still trip people up. So design is important, even outside of software, but within software as well. So people are resistant to change, and so being able to actually see that, oh, this button is clickable, or that this is a navigation element, or that this is an image, or here's a way to slide back and forth between images, or whatever else, just be able to understand how those work makes a big difference. Okay. So conventions, not talking about actually showing up and attending like today. This is conventions that people use to understand how something else works somewhere else and apply that to how it's working in this other context. And so think about a shopping cart. If you go online and you go to add something to your cart, it is similar into the real world of putting things into a shopping cart or a basket in a store and then going to the checkout. Because you have not committed to purchase it yet, but you are holding on to it, and you can change things, you can adjust it, but you have set these things aside as something that you want to purchase. And so there's a convention to follow that and be able to say, okay, I want to add this to my cart. I know that I'm not purchasing it right away, and I know that I'm not losing it. I'm setting it into a special place that I can then continue forward and make an easy purchase afterwards if I want to. So there've been a lot of different usability studies on whether you say add to basket, add to shopping bag or whatever else. And then various companies have often come back to actually just using cart, even though it's maybe not as familiar with their brand or whatnot, but because the convention is strong. And that's what people look for when they're trying to use the app. Right. So they say that helps them to concentrate on what they want to do, not how they do it, because they say, I know what adding to a cart does, and that's following convention. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about layouts too. Place for everything and everything in its place. So logical grouping is a pretty important one. If you have information all over the page and it's difficult to see where this relates to this or how this is part of this, or you're trying to find one thing on the page and you can't find it because it's just a smorgasbord of information everywhere, it's going to make it difficult for people to actually accomplish the goal that they're there for. So having consistent logical grouping for navigation, oftentimes across the top or along the bottom or along the some sort of outer edge, as well as they call paneling, which you can see from that example there, where they've broken things out. See if I have a mouse. Okay, you can kind of sort of see my mouse. But so paneling being like this is an area here, here's another area for images, here's another area here. You kind of have just groups of things where it's, okay, this is this section of things, but there's no like visual border around it necessarily. It's just that it's a designated area, and white space can help a lot, just kind of inferring, okay, this is where this stops and ends, and this is where the other thing ends. So primary content you want to have pretty in focus and be able to see and at a glance, usually above the fold. Above the fold being an old newspaper term, but for basically being visible at first glance as opposed to having to scroll down, or in the newspaper world having to flip over or turn in or whatever. And then in this case, you can see too, like this is an example from Dribble, which is a design website. But the primary properties about this design are up here. So you could like it, or you could share it, or you could add to the bucket, and then you can see the color palette and some other things about it all in one place. And then the main content is in the middle with the images. And then you can see they have another section for navigation with the tags, or they have a related content too in its own area there too. So just having kind of a central design with the main content that they care about, maybe some call out some main pieces that are important, and then have some ancillary things broken out as well. You can also notice that I like how they put the advertising nearby but not in the way. And so a lot of times, though, to get the better click rates, people are putting advertising in the middle of the content. Like Facebook has started doing that too, where you scroll and you see posts, and then all of a sudden there's a suggested post, which is an advertisement or whatever, in the middle, so that people will stop on it and see, as opposed to being off to the sides. So hierarchy is another important aspect for layout. So having some sort of a parent-child relationship of where you're at within an application or within a website, or how things relate, can be very important too. People go, especially for websites, they access from all different ways. They don't always start at your home page and then go and drill down to find where they're at. They may come in off of a search engine, or a link that someone sent to them, or an email that you've sent to them, said, hey, go register for this event. They didn't go to your home page to do that. They went to a specific page. And so understanding where they're at any point within the application can be very helpful. So in this case, you have world news, and so you're under the news section, and then it has world underneath, and you can see other related navigation. So, okay, well, if I wanted to see other news that's related to national news for the Japan Times, or references or columns, etc., or you can go to the higher level and say, okay, well, I don't want to see news right now, I want to go into the opinion section or whatever else. And so there's different ways to organize that. But that helps them to narrow down, say, I want news, so that let me ignore all the other pieces at the top level and only see the lower level, and I can decide within that. So they can narrow down their choices mentally. Okay, who uses Craigslist? Anybody? A couple of people? Okay. Who loves the UI of Craigslist? Right? Still pretty useful. I mean, people use it all the time, and they find a lot of stuff, but that is, literally, I took that screen capture today. That is a super simple user interface, but it's not necessarily a good one. And so what might be something that you don't like about it? You just shout out.
All the text is blue.
All of the text is blue. That's the first thing I think of as well. So prominence of trying to call out, hey, this is something you probably really want to see, or a call to action saying this is important, you should go do this, is very difficult when everything looks the same. And so you have visual weight that you can apply with all sorts of different ways to do it. You can do larger size, and you can have color, you can show depth on something, the location being up towards the top versus other things, and it's a relational as well. The intensity, so like the weight or like the vibrance of the color or different things, can all be a big thing for prominence. But so something that you'll run into a lot of times too, people want to make everything bold, and that basically makes nothing bold, because everything is not separating out from everything else. And so you have to be really judicious in your use of making things bold, and you use white space or use other things to help separate that. So if the user can't find it, it effectively doesn't exist. You may have spent months building this feature or building this other area of the app or whatever else, but if no one's going to it because they can't find it, then you wasted a lot of time. Now you can correct that. That's the cool thing about it, is that then you can change your navigation, or you can change the visual prominence or the location on the page or whatever else and make it more prominent or more user-friendly. But if people aren't using it, then it's effectively not there. So one of the key points too is to never rely on a user's memory, because you never know how many people actually are going to come right back to that exact same spot and always remember, or how frequently they're going to use it. And you can use some analytics to try and figure out that a little bit. If you have a captive audience where it's someone who works on this software day in and day out, that sort of helps. But at the same time, when they're out sick that day and someone else has to cover for them, that other person is just as lost as the normal person on their first day. So you want to make it as easy to use as possible, and you also don't want to rely on training to be your only user experience guide either. Because if you're just implying that, okay, well, they'll get it after they work on it enough. You hear that a lot, but that's a bit of a cop-out, to be honest. So you want to make it as intuitive as possible from the get-go and have help and stuff available, but it really needs to be kind of self-documenting in the way that it's laid out and how to find things. Okay, so here's my favorite part. What are we going to talk about next? I need a little interaction. Click here links. Why are they the worst? They don't describe where you're going. Lots of reasons. So notice how the click here and here is the only thing that you can actually click on, implied by the visual affordance of the underline and the convention of underline links being something that you can click and do something with. But you have to read all of this text to then figure out, oh, here's where I go to be able to get back to it. So, if you remember anything from this presentation, this is the one thing I want you to remember. Never click here. It's generic. You don't know what here is. It's hard to find, because you can see in this screenshot, the click here to log in, that's the login link on that page. Mm-hmm. It's patronizing to the users, and by that I mean you're telling them, oh, you need to use something to click to be able to touch this, to be able to interact with my site. They understand that because they're on your website. It's an intuitive thing. You don't need to be telling them how to use the site. It should be implied. It's dated terminology as well. So a lot of people are using mobile devices or touchscreen devices, and there is no click in that. It's tap or some other term. And so you could say click or tap here, but better yet, don't say that at all. It's also a smaller target area, so if you're on a mobile phone or if you're having, there's accessibility concerns with that too, which we'll talk about in a second. And so you have to get to a small area to be able to click on it when it's just the word here, or sometimes, like I said, you'll say click here to something, and the whole thing is a link, which is better but not good. And then, like I said, it's a smaller target area. It's not accessibility friendly because a lot of times, like a screen reader or other systems, when it says here, it's not able to read the context and be able to provide that audibly or in some other manner to someone who has difficulty seeing the text on the screen to be able to tell them what here is. You have to read all the text around it. And so some of the different software providers have gotten better at trying to read context around it and provide some of that, but it's just a bad practice in general. So just because people continue to do it doesn't make it a good idea. This was, this has been around for probably almost the age of the internet, and yet people continue to do it, and we've not solved it yet. So, there's like 30 people here today, so that's 30 more people that hopefully will remember, right? It's also not search engine friendly, so being able to actually crawl through the site and figure out what is here, they don't know how to get to that. And again, search engines are trying to get better about it too, but we need to get better as developers and designers to not have that be a problem. And it's just plain not user friendly. So do you see how that has this giant arrow right here? I didn't draw that.
Oh dear God.
This is a help screen from this organization's website that tells them how to log in and how to do different steps. Right?
Oh
Right.
Wow.
So, calls to action. Here's an example. Click here to watch the webinar. How could you do that better? Watch the webinar. You start with an action verb. You have the entire link be something that's actually useful and that also is search engine friendly and it's accessibility friendly. The whole thing is tappable because you have multiple words that are tappable, and you immediately see context of, oh, I'm going to go click on this and do something, and you have the visual affordance of the link being on the context of what you're going to do instead of being on a word that says here that you then have to follow later and say, oh, how do I get to there? Oh, here, that's what I do. And it helps to just distinguish that from the rest of the page. So, for example, in one of the tools that we use, we have a giant log file that gets spit out for Nucleus, and we don't have control over the way that it displays some of it, but it has, just imagine a huge page, or a page full of just text, and it's roughly formatted, all left aligned, but a lot of really technical stuff on there, and kind of in the middle, in two different places, in the exact same text color, the exact same font size, and everything else. The only thing that's different is an underline. It says click here, with the word here underlined, to see the full log. You already see a full page of all sorts of stuff on it, but to be able to see the full log, and you don't know that it's truncated, you have to find this link in this one spot. In the middle of the page, it looks like everything else except for an underline under one word that says here. That's a usability concern. So if you didn't know already, when you're designing an application or you're writing a blog post or you're writing an email, people are not going to really read it. They're going to look at it. But they've done studies, and this is a heat map study from years ago. It's an F-shaped reading pattern that people tend to follow. So Nielsen-Norman Group is a usability group. It's been around forever. They're kind of a staple of the industry. But if you think about it, you do the same thing yourself. So if you go to a website, you're not going to necessarily read every single paragraph of every detail unless it's something that is specifically pertinent to you and you really care about it. And so you can draw people in by giving them better information and kind of front-loading some of the different areas and saying, okay, here's the important part, and then here's some more information. Here's another important part, here's some more information about it, etc. Use appropriate headings to be able to kind of break it up so they can find what they want. And then you'll kind of see, okay, well, they're going to hit the target maps a little bit better. But this is like a bunch of people that they just overlaid, they were actually doing an eye tracking study on different websites. And so like it's been around forever. It's an older usability study, but it still holds up. Okay. All right. What's the consistency, Kenneth? Anyone get the reference? Okay. Well, a couple REM fans out there at least. All right. So the importance of application UX guidelines. Here's the group activity. We're going to do a sketchy idea. I'm going to pass some of these out. Take a few pens. You have your own paper and pen, that's fine, but I would prefer you use actual paper and pen as opposed to a laptop. I would like everyone to participate, if you wouldn't mind, just because it's kind of part of the exercise. Okay, don't start yet. Does anybody not have a pen and a piece of paper? Everybody's covered? Okay. Please turn it landscape mode. So it's wide like a monitor. All right? Your requirements that you've gotten in a Word document from a user or client or some other person, your boss, whomever it is you need to design a form for your application that has these elements on it. Go. So first name, text box, last name, text box, an email address text box, a phone number text box, which is optional to the user, not optional to you to draw. Mailing address text boxes, which are also optional. A password text box, a confirm password text box, and a checkbox to accept the terms and conditions, and then a submit button, a cancel button, and some sort of validation message. So it doesn't have to look like a good sketch, just whatever's top of mind. We're not grading how good your usability of it was, I promise. Well, I'll be silently judging you, but that's okay. If there's anybody streaming from home, like I think what we got, like 4,000 right now, right?
3,990.
I was close, close. Okay. Feel free to follow along, and we're gonna try and share some stuff on there too. But I'll give you a few more minutes. So it's pretty rough. It doesn't have to be too fancy. First name and last name, email address, optional phone number, optional mailing address with multiple text boxes probably, password and confirm password, a checkbox to accept the terms and conditions, submit button, cancel button, some sort of validation message. Give you a few more minutes to keep working. Again, it doesn't have to be pretty. Does anyone have any questions about what we're doing? No? Okay. Okay, show of hands, who needs a little bit more time? Couple people? Okay. Different question. Show of hands, how many people have gotten requirements kind of similar to this? Yeah? In some way? Somebody? Or just an idea that you're trying to figure out, like how do I do this? How should this look? This is a pretty common sign-up form of some kind. Okay, whatever you got's good enough. So let's put pencils down, pens down, and I would like for everyone to please stand up carefully. Don't knock over drinks or food. Watch out for laptops and other devices and cords, etc. Scoot your chairs in and walk around. And look at how everyone else designed their form and think about how that's different or similar to yours. And we'll talk about it in a minute. Okay. Most everybody kind of seems to they've made the rounds. Okay, go ahead and sit back down. Feel free to grab some more pizza or a soda or something if you want to.
That's what I was going. There you go. So your UI is going to have
Okay. Thanks to everyone for participating. Let's talk about it. Show of hands, how many people designed it wrong? It's a total trick question. There's no wrong. We haven't decided what right is. We don't have a guideline. So, how many people noticed that their design was at least slightly different than other people's? Yeah. I gave you all the same requirements, though. Why are they different? There's a lot of different ways to do it. What if we were all on one software team building the same giant software system? Maybe we were building Facebook, or maybe we were building Microsoft Office or something like that. And we didn't have some sort of guidelines or reviews or whatever else.
absolute
Chaos, yeah. Yeah. Right. So, quick show of hands. How many people laid out the form pretty much vertical, straight up and down? Okay? Yeah? How many people broke it out into a couple different columns? Yeah? Good. So just almost a 50-50 split, maybe 70-30. And then how many people put the labels next to, like side by side, to the field? Well, first of all, how many people put labels on there? See, okay, you did all right. So who put them side by side? Couple people? How many put them on top? Well, the other. Maybe about a third. How many people put it below? Nobody put them below. To the right. Why are you laughing?
Well, we read left to right.
Right. But it's all, well, we do. Not everybody does. But also, it's a convention, right? You're used to that. You see that. People are accustomed to that. And so there's nothing wrong with saying that you couldn't have them over to the right, but it doesn't mean it's the best choice because people infer from other usage.
It's not in the F.
Right, it's not in the F. That's right. It's a good use. Not in the F shape pattern. How many people put the label inside of the text box or other control? A few people. Yeah. So, a lot of different ways to do it. I'm not telling you what the right one is, because it really doesn't. It depends. I mean, it depends on your use. It depends on what you decide as a group and how you want to do it. Your usability studies and what you feel like is the best. There's other studies that have been out there that are specifically around forms. Like forms is one of like the most forms and navigation are the most researched usability studies I think that are out there, in my opinion. So, and also if you just search for the word "click here," there's a ton of usability articles about how terrible that is. So just bring that around. So, if we had guidelines besides just requirements, and I said the flow needs to be like this, and we need to have, in general, labels need to be above, or they need to be to the left, or they need to be responsive, and so on a wide screen it uses two columns and it has them side by side so that we make use of the wider screen, which is why I had you turn it sideways too, so that more people would also imply, oh, I can use more than one column. But then, or maybe our calls to action need to look a certain way. So like a submit button. So obviously when you're just sketching something, you don't necessarily put a lot of visual weight on things. But typically like your primary call to action, the thing that you want them to be doing, you want to highlight that. And then any sort of negative action like a cancel or a close or a reset or whatever else, you don't want that to look exactly like the other one. You want that to be like, oh, you can do this if you have to, but we really want you to continue forward on the happy path to success of submitting and giving us your money or joining our group or whatever it is. Right? So having some sort of a design guideline for how you want it to work is pretty important, even if you're a team of 2. Really, if you're a team of 1, because then you have to continue building that, and you look back at your guidelines and say, okay, I did it this way, okay, and then somebody else ends up taking it on, or the customer says, oh, well, I need to do this differently, or why did you do it this way? You've got a guideline you can follow back on. And there's different ones out there that you can find, but you really kind of have to come up with your own and just kind of stick with it. So I used to work for a large corporation and did a lot of design reviews and did this exercise as well, usually kind of the same results. And it was almost the exact same example, and that was back in 2007. And it's still a lot of variety between what people do. Actually, a little bit more variety now because mobile and all that stuff has taken a much bigger hold into usability. And so we actually had a common style guide that was just that buttons look like this, text boxes look like this. You use this CSS class for this or whatever else. That doesn't fix the scenario we just saw. You can have text boxes all look the same, but they're laid out completely differently, and so you need to take it another step forward. I didn't even ask about validation. Did anyone do inline form validation? Help people? Anybody do like a message at the top that says that, yeah? Okay, you got a problem with the form? What about down by the submit button or whatever? Okay? Yeah? So there's problems with all of those. So inline validation, you don't necessarily see it when you're down at the bottom. It also takes up more room on the screen. You have to figure out what's wrong. You don't have a summary of what's going on. Like, okay, I fixed this one. What about all the rest of them? If it's at the very top, you've already filled out the form and potentially are further down, especially on a small device, and you don't necessarily see that. So you click submit and you send them to the top of the page to say, oh, here are the problems, start again. But they've just lost context from where they were. And now you've jarred them, cognitive break of, okay, wait a minute, I'm up here again. Oh, this is the same page, or did I go to the next page? No, it's the same one. You got to keep fixing stuff. Put it at the very bottom, and then they have to scroll up and find, and go back down to the bottom again and try and find where it's at. So you could do something where it floats and it stays with you all along. You could do multiple combinations of different pieces. There's a lot of different ways to validate. There's not necessarily one silver bullet. Okay. Getting toward the end. Yeah.
I know there's probably not right or wrong answer, but the cancel and submit buttons, does it matter if they're on the left or right?
That's a good question. Yeah. So it used to be Windows based systems had the primary button on the left and the other one on the right, and they were almost always in the bottom right corner, but sometimes they were in the middle. Placement within the form makes a big difference too. That's another thing we could have gotten into. But then Mac was always the reverse. And the main thing is that you visually differentiate them as opposed to just the location relative to each other. Because if you do that, you're still winning, whether it's reverse or not. Be consistent in your application however you do it. And like I said, you want to guide the user the direction that they want to go. Toby.
Well, since we normally go left to right,
Mm-hmm.
I've always had an issue with the going forward on the left as opposed to going forward on the right and going backward on the left.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
the
So.
first thing is always going left cancel, right submit.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So it used to be too that if you do like a modal dialog or some other like a Windows Forms dialog or whatever, then it would be one way. But then if you're on a wizard, it would be the opposite. And so there's a lot of different combinations of that. But yeah, reading right to left, but then you're also, if you have multiple buttons that are non primary path, and so it's like, oh, here's a help button, here's a clear button, here's a cancel button, here's a reset button, here's a restore defaults, here's something else. You got 4 or 5 buttons there that they've got to read through before they get to the primary one over on the far right. Doesn't mean it's bad, but it also takes that button and puts it the furthest away from the last thing that they just typed in. And so you have more cognitive or visual noise noise pollution. On the page, that's a different issue. But if you have too many different buttons and other features, as long as you're making the primary action really visible, then that's the key part, whether it's at the end or at the beginning. But yeah, I'd say it's having it at the right does seem to make sense. Okay. Usability testing. Who's done a usability test before? A couple of hands. Good. Okay. So, who knows what a usability test is? I'm going to call on you now.
Oh, that's where you bring in people who are not familiar with the product and see how they react to it.
Perfect. Yeah, you bring in people who are not familiar with the product and you see how they react. You look at how they use the system and try to determine, is the system working for the people that would be using it? So, why do we want to do usability testing? We as designers and as developers and other people that are stakeholders in the project, we know what goes into this system to make it work. So we make assumptions that people are going to use it the way that we designed it. And we also assume that what we made makes sense. So we get tunnel vision. I used to freelance a lot with web design, and I eventually made myself not send in a design at 2 in the morning to someone until the next morning after I had cleared my head and made sure, because I would work on it for several hours and then say, oh, this looks great. This is going to be great. They're going to love this. And then I would send it, and I would come back and look at it myself the next morning after I sent it, and be like, wow, I really kind of went off on a tangent here. That's not exactly what I want here. You know, you got to, like, even just your own work, you can get into tunnel vision. And so much less as a product group or as developing something as a team. You also have a technical mindset. Regardless of whether it's design or whether it's business, tech that you know about how it works, or whether it's actual like coding development. And so, we wrote it this way because that's easier to code. As a UX architect, I don't care how easy it is or not easy it is to code. I sort of do, but I don't care from the design aspect. I want to find what is the best way to do it, what's going to work the best, how do we design that, and then can we get it to work within the budget constraints, or do we have to make other decisions, etc. So you can't take that prejudice of, I am the person who's writing the code, I know it will be a lot easier if I did it this way, into the design. Now at the same time, as a designer, you can't just design something like, oh, this would be fantastic, I could do this, and there's no way to implement it. So it's a give and take. So, usability tests on the cheap. So you can do A/B testing where you have one part of the app that's shown to some people, and then other people go to the app and they see it a different way, and you can then track that and see how are they using it, etc. You can pay people to come to your usability test. You can actually like set up cameras to watch them, and you can do all that other stuff. But if you don't have the budget for that, it doesn't mean you shouldn't do any sort of usability tests. You can do really, really cheap usability tests that is a hug for your mom, a beer for your friend, or a cup of coffee for your coworker. Just have somebody, preferably multiple somebodies, look at what you're building and give you feedback on it, and don't lead them. I'm going to go into this a little bit more. So ideally people who sort of know the general subject but are not necessarily involved in developing the app. So someone else who's related but not related to the software in some way, but not one of the stakeholders in it. So when you're conducting those tests, you should give them a task list of saying, hey, you're going to test this e-commerce app that I just built, and I want you to go find this product, and I want you to add it to the cart, and I want you to pay with a credit card. And so you have a defined list of things that you want them to do, but you don't tell them how to do it, not even in the list. And so they work through that in front of you while you are sitting there watching them, and you take notes on what it is they do, what they don't do, where they get stuck, and you can interact with them and ask them questions like, why did you do that? Or what do you think you need to do next? Like the cartoon is showing there. There's a lot of different ways to do it, but what you don't want to do is lead them unless they get completely stuck. But at that point, you should be taking really good notes as to why they don't know what to do. And so you can say, okay, well, actually, if you do it this way, then that'll help to get you a little further. And then you stop telling them what else to do. But you don't want to be like, okay, yeah, and then you click here, right? Because you're putting your own bias on what the next thing is before you continue forward. And a big thing with this that I've noticed is to make sure that the people who are testing it realize you are not testing their intelligence. You are testing your design, and they know that. And you give them feedback throughout the usability test saying, hey, I really appreciate this. This is, I'm finding some things that I need to do better that everyone else will find useful. Because otherwise, they can get a little nervous and feel like, well, I should have understood that, or I should know how to do this, or next time if I come in here, I'll know it. Well, that's great, but the next time you come in here may not be the first time that everyone else comes in there too, and they're having the same stumbling block that you did. So you want to fix it for everybody, not just the next time, or if I do it enough, I'll remember, or whatever. So you can keep them open mind too, because they may find something and try to do something a different way that you didn't even expect. And don't try and tell them, oh, well, no one else will do that. Well, if somebody else did it, try to validate that with more people and see if anyone else also takes that same path and goes a different way than way you intended. And then possibly either change the design to kind of alter them back to the course you need them to go through, or make it adaptable and change it to make what makes more sense to the user. So accept suggestions, but something that I noticed a lot with this too is people will also try to tell you how you should do it. And you want to appreciate that, but you don't want to necessarily take that to heart. And you want to, be nice about it, but tell them, oh, I appreciate that, and I'll consider that, but it may not be how I end up doing it, because you are ultimately a designer, not them, and you hopefully have, listened to this course and know a little bit about UX best practices, whereas other people may or may not have some insight into it, but they're going to have valid suggestions and say, oh, well, if you do this, that might be great. So keep an open mind and think about it, but it may not be what you ultimately have to do. So ideally, you would do this early and do it often, so that you have multiple iterations, multiple people, so it may cost you a couple of cups of coffee instead. Okay. Last section. Power to the people. Yeah, Jesse.
So with the usability test, would there be a possibility of trying to get unique people, or do you want to maybe repeat or recycle some of the people that we used earlier?
Good question. So with the usability test, do we want to try and usability test with the same person over and over, or try and find unique people every time? Ideally, it might be a mix of both, where you can say, look, I fixed it, is this better? But they're already going to have context at that point and say, okay, I know what to do, unless you already stopped at a certain spot and it's like, okay, now we've gotten here, let's move on. Or I've built more features, let's have you do this other task. So then they have some context, and then they also hopefully are following other conventions or guidelines that you've designed in the other things they've already worked on or worked through your task list, and they say, oh, I remember when I looked at this other part that this is how they did this, and so when I go to this other one, I can carry that forward as a convention that this is probably how this is going to work too. And so you still want to have, especially if you had some problems in one of the tasks and you're trying to figure out how you design it differently to fix it, you may want to bring in some more people too to be able to get new, fresh ideas on that. Good question. Okay, so like I said, last section, power to the people. Designed to get out of their way. Stealth UX. It's fun to say. I like to think of it as the CIA. If you've ever seen the old movie with Robert De Niro, it's The Recruit. Anybody? And anyway, the line goes that something to the effect of, in the CIA, we have thousands of successes that nobody ever hears about. You only hear about the problems. You only hear about when things go bad. Otherwise, we're solving problems all day long and nobody knows about it. That's what you want your UX to be. It's great if someone says, oh man, this website was fantastic, I loved using it, and then they write you feedback, or they put something on social media and say, this is a fantastic site, you're going to love it, or they give you reviews, which are a lot more common now, be able to give reviews. People are still going to be a little cynical about some of that stuff, and they're going to say, well, I really wish it had this feature, so I'm going to give you 3 stars out of 5. I never built that feature, I didn't want that feature to be part of it, there's a reason it's not there, and so you still get that. Or some people were like, well, you know what, I just don't ever give 5 stars. I feel like they could have done better, so I'm going to give you 4. I think it's fantastic, but you could have somehow done better. So you're not always going to get that happy, warm, fuzzy feeling of this is fantastic, everybody loves it. Now you can do usability, ongoing studies, and you can look at analytics as how people are using it and how conversion rates have changed. And so, okay, well now we have a lot more click-throughs now, or we have a lot more people that actually purchase things than we did before. Now that we've redesigned some things, but you're not necessarily going to hear a whole lot of just joyous applause. You want it to just work. And you want to not hear complaints because they can do their job or they can buy the thing that they want to do and they can move on. So the best compliment that I ever got in designing software was from a nice lady in New Jersey who was using my trucking software that for logging appointments for when things were going to be delivered. And she started out saying that she really hated the new system. She didn't like it. It was difficult. It was different, and it was troublesome. And I was calling her because I saw that there was a problem in the code, that an error had come through, and I said, okay, well, it's a new system. Let's kind of figure out what's going on. It was part of the same company that I worked for, so I reached out and said, hey, I wanted to know what happened here. Maybe you can give me a little bit of insight. And so she gave me some feedback, and then we kind of I was like, okay, well, what is it that you don't like about it? And she kind of talked, and a thick New Jersey accent, a lot of profanity, not necessarily directed at the application per se. But as I got to talking with her, I tried to keep an open mind, and I was just listening to what she was saying, trying to hear that feedback as well, and there's actionable things from that too. But then ultimately, as she's talking through it, even she realizes and says, well, really, I got it to work. I customized my workflow so that it does exactly what I want now, better than the old system, but I figured it out, and I did this, and I did that, in her voice, because we designed the system into 3 steps. You do this, and then you do this, and do this. And you can customize within that to what you like, because it's different from every user in this other system, so how they do their job, and then it streamlines everything. And then it remembers that, you can keep going forward. Before, they had to just do all sorts of stuff, and you had to click this, and right-click on this, and do it just all over the place. It wasn't very well designed. And so she eventually is telling me, you know what, I figured out this. I was empowered as a user to do this, and I got it to work the way I wanted it to do it. And kind of changed her mind even within the same conversation, because she didn't like change. People don't like having to learn a new system or do something different. But now, well, it's a lot better now because I got it to work. Well, that's great. That's the whole point. Ideally, we would have it streamlined from the beginning, but there was so much diversity between how people used it and where they used it and what they use it for, et cetera, that we couldn't do that with so much. But it learns and continues forward. So. They should also never realize, and people don't realize how much work or how much effort goes into designing something or developing something when you just pull up an app on your phone and you're like, oh, look, this is glitchy, or oh, this, I wish this was a little faster. Like, well, that's great. It may have been a team of people that spent a whole lot of time, or it may have been, one person who's working on their nights and weekends while they're going to school at the same time, and they're taking care of their family, and they're working another job or whatever else. They're like, you know what, I'm going to put this out here because this is something I really like. And I think that's going to be great. But they don't know the effort that goes behind it. And so, like I said, you're not always going to get the warm, happy feelings. Sometimes you do, and that's great. So tone. This is something to be mindful of as well. So who recognizes the top left corner area there? What's it known as? Blue screen of death, right? BSOD. Windows failed hard. It is not going to come back up without help. That is the older way that they had that on there, and then they realized, oh, you know what? This is not helpful to 99% of the people who use Windows. And so they revamped it some. You can see over on the bottom corner, it cuts it off a little bit on the screen here, but there's like you guys might remember what I'm talking about, like a colon and then a frown emoticon type of thing. It says something went wrong in really big text. And then it tells you, we're sorry, we can't, couldn't fix it right away, we're going to do something else, etc. And then has a little bit of details down there. It says, hey, here's the error. As opposed to, some sort of, error code down there and some other weird stuff up there and a whole bunch of junk in the middle that most people are not going to know, and they're not going to need that. So design, even when there's failure or unexpected problems. So you want to be courteous to them and be non-technical and possible, because the end users are not necessarily going to be technical people. And you want to be brief, because no one's going to read all that, right? Remember, people don't read things. They look at things. And so he's like, oh, there's a problem. Bright big blue, or bright white text on a blue background. Got it, there's a problem. Jesse, yeah.
Implies that they don't know what they're doing. It starts talking about making sure their hardware is plugged in correctly and properly installed. And it was a bad message.
Yeah. So the comment was that it implies that the user doesn't know what they're talking about, or doesn't know what they're doing, based off of some of the messaging. So you have to be mindful of that, and it's just like a 404 message. Like if you go to you get a 404 error not page not found or whatever on a website, that's not your fault as the end user, right? Whose fault is it? The person who maintains the site. The developer isn't at fault. Just kidding. Yeah, it's the developers and designers. Yeah, question. Right, right. So yeah, reminded the person of technical support having to call, and the first thing was, well, did you plug it in? Yeah, I probably did that. So that'd be helpful.
There's a reason for that.
Mhm.
Is we ask that question,
Right.
and you say yeah,
Mhm.
then I come there and it's not plugged in.
Right. Right. Like I say, it kind of works both ways sometimes. Where maybe they actually are just like, of course I did that, but it really no, seriously, you didn't actually plug it in. Yeah. So that's possible too. So. User-centric design. That's what we're trying to go. That's the goal. You want to be designing for the end users, not for you, not for your friends, not for unless your friends are the ones using the app, I should say, and not for your boss or whomever else. Not to win as a design award or the most creative, weird way to do something. You want it to be easy for someone to do their job, or easy to someone to accomplish a task that they want to do to make their job or life or entertainment more enjoyable, better, easier, etc. So when you are out looking at software somewhere, or you're on your mobile phone or whatever else, and you see a problem that it bugs you, remember that, because when you're designing software and you're building software, etc., keep that in mind and say, oh, you know what, that really bothered me when I saw that click here link, so I will never ever ever make one myself, right? Okay. And sweat the details. You can see a polished design, and you may not notice all the tiny intricacies of it, but when someone takes the time to make everything look good, make things line up right, make the things consistent, it really makes the app stand out a whole lot more. And I don't know about you, but especially if I'm like on my mobile phone looking at the App Store to see what's available, if someone has a really junky UI, I don't care what the feature is, I'm probably not going to download it. Because if I'm on my phone, I want it to be able to easy, quick, fast, and do what I want, and also not look ugly. Okay. So, last real slide. Design is everywhere. So this is not just software. Who has heard about I think it's Optimum UX, the RX design system that people came up with? Anybody heard of that? I've got a photo of it right here. Does anybody, no details, but does anyone actually use any sort of pharmacy that has this type of design on its pill bottles and things? Yeah. Okay. So I have a link in the slides, the notes and stuff. There's a whole article about it, but there was a designer whose grandparents both took the same type of medicine, and they were using the old style pill bottles, and both of them had the first initial same last name, so it was H something, Anderson, for example, H. Anderson, and also Mr. H. Anderson and Mrs. H. Anderson were Helen and Hank, I don't know, and it was the same medication but different dosages, and one of them took the wrong medication and ended up in the hospital and almost died because they took way too much for that person. Because there's too much similarity between all of that, and there's not a lot of design around it. So this person, it was their grandparents, and like I said, it's a cool story to learn about, came up with a better way to design pill bottles. And so this actually, it sits upside down. Across the very top, it has printed what the medicine is, so that so it sits upside down so that when you can open the bottom of it, and you can still read the label. But at the top, you can still see what it is too. You don't have to turn it upside. You turn it upside down to open things or whatever else. You can still see the label. It has colored bands for different people in the family. So you could be orange, and then your spouse could be blue or whatever else. And then that way, okay, at a glance, this is mine. It also, you can see that it has things more clearly printed, larger text. It even has a slide-out piece of plastic that is a magnifying glass. So you can slide that out and see immediately, how you read that. And then you can also just see how many refills, how many, quantity, et cetera, really easy to read, et cetera. So design is everywhere. Alarm clocks. I used to have an alarm clock that I hated. And it was not because I hated getting up in the morning. It was because it was so poorly designed that every single button was the exact same shape, all laid out in 2 rows. There were 12 buttons that did different things. I only ever wanted to do 2 of them. And it was a radio dock that I could put my phone into, and I could use it as a speaker. But I couldn't even press the snooze button because it was one of the 12 that were all the exact same size. And the light had no adjustment. It was glaringly bright. And like, that's the type of stuff, like, you notice that, and just remember that when you're designing. Maybe you're not designing actual physical hardware that's going to be put out that somebody's going to use, but you're going to notice that when you're designing software or using software too. And it's everywhere. Light switches, pathways in a park. So there used to be a theater downtown. It's been revamped since then, but they had a grassy area, and it had sidewalks all around it. Some of you may know what I'm talking about. It used to be College Station, I think, and now it's something else. And so there was a well-worn path right through the grass, and there was no grass whatsoever there because that's where everyone walked. And so that is the usability of people getting from point A to point B, and that's where they're going, as opposed to the design of, we have the light grassy area, kids will play while they're waiting, etc. I was like, no, we just ruined your grass because we're trying to get into the theater because we're running late, or we just don't want to walk around. So eventually they put up fencing all along the edging of it, and it was like road construction fence. It wasn't even like, nice looking fence, and it was there for months. So like I said, that's just an example. So, all right, we're running a little bit over time. I appreciate everybody, all your good feedback, and I appreciate you, indulging me in the design exercise and everything. But again, I'm Tim Franklin, Director of Product Development at Gravitate Solutions. There's my Gmail address if you want to email me, have UI questions or whatever else. And then, like I said, I'm on Twitter. There's a bunch of other stuff out there, too. There's tons of usability books and blogs and other stuff out there. I encourage you to just kind of read it and learn about it. If you have any interest at all, there's just a wealth of knowledge that's free and available to learn about. So, thank you. Okay.